So this morning, our program we're very lucky to have David Williamson here. He is the vice president of the Central Florida Free Thought Community. He and his wife Jocelyn, who is the president, they are the sponsors and coordinators and developers of Free Flow that happens up in the Orlando area every other year. And they do a tremendous job. And I know Greg got a chance to go up there for the 2025 conference. I didn't make it up there, but we'd really like to see more humanists make it to the Free Flow conference because it's just inspiring and you learn so much. It's and we have it right here, 2-hour drive to go to it. So David Williamson, like I said, he's the vice president of Central Florida Free Thought Community, and his presentation today is called The Establishment of Religion, a How-To Guide. Now, some of you may recall that he did this presentation before, maybe not exactly the same presentation, but this was a topic. And so this is going to be a repeat for some of you. It's going to be new for others. And I think he's also massaged the presentation a bit as well. So what he has to say is some still assert that our establishment clause only prohibits the government from establishing an official religion. David will discuss why this is not the case and tell you what you need to know to counter that argument yourself. Now, like I said, he is the co-founder of CFFC. Locally, he's a member of the Central Florida Commission on Religious Freedom, secretary of the board of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida, and the Florida Humanist Association. He is the co-coordinator of that organization's conference, Free Flow, like I said. And David is on the advisory board of the Free Thought Equity Fund and a Florida state representative of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So David, welcome, thank you, and you have the podium, sir.
Thank you, and thanks for the kind invitation to come back again. It's good to be back, and I recognize some of you, but I see a lot of new faces. And thanks for joining and having me as a guest in your community, because community is where we find friends and partners in good trouble, and we need to overlap our communities with others that think very much like us and sometimes very different than us. You heard some of the credentials that I bring really put me into places where I deal with liberal religion, many Christians, and even a few that are close to Christian nationalists. And the more friends that we have that we disagree with, the better off the world will be. And I know that's hard work. And I know some of you engage in that over the Thanksgiving table, whether you like it or not, right? But community is where we find solace. And I want to acknowledge your community here and show my gratitude to those who keep it strong and growing. So thank you for that. Let me share my screen. So we're ready to go. All right. So once we've consoled ourselves and those we care about around us, particularly after the last election, we need to regroup and reinforce ourselves so we can head right back into battle. Now is not the time to retreat from the fight. 1 second here to find the rest of the screen here. Hold on. Apologies. I've lost some of what I'm seeing here, and I just want to make sure I have it. So let me click that button there. Okay. Very good. Now I can see your faces. So as I said, the results of the most recent election, no matter how it went, does not change the facts on the ground regarding the privilege religion has in societies around the world and that Christianity has in particular here in the United States. So I hope what I talk about is meaningful to you. If you'd like to be in touch, I'm easy to reach at david@cflfreethought.org. And you're seeing my screen now, correct? Okay, great.
Yes.
So as we begin, I want to point out that I have a few blank or black slides in this presentation, and that's for effect that it's intentional. So don't be surprised by that. Depending upon your view settings, you may see the entire group or you may see me, but I want you to kind of focus on me as opposed to the visuals. You know how sometimes slides can be distracting, so it tries to bring the attention back. It's also been updated to reflect a couple of new ways in which we are seeing the establishment of religion for those who were with us before. But let's start with something that Ben Franklin wrote in 1790. When a religion is good, I can see that it will support itself. And when it cannot support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of a civil power, it is a sign, I apprehend, of it being a bad one. Here, Franklin acknowledges religion may bring value to society unless and until it needs the government support to help prop it up. And that point is where he has his doubts. So let's talk a little bit about the Establishment Clause. It reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And if we evaluate the word respecting, we would think of it as with respect to or regarding. The word establishment was not a confusing term for the constitutional framers who were very familiar with official state religions. Each of the colonies had an official religion in their own charter, and Mother England did so as well and still does today. So the clause quite simply tells us Congress cannot pass a law regarding a state religion. It does not read, Congress shall not establish a state religion. This is quite a different statement and is much less restrictive. The distinction, though, hopefully becomes less important today as you learn about what the Establishment Clause actually does. And you've got some evidence when you're done to demonstrate why that is. But if the founders meant to just say, we can't establish a state religion, they had every chance to do so. The clause was debated and discussed thoroughly. More conservative language was rejected in favor of the version of the clause that we have. So in 1791, the Establishment Clause applied only to the federal government, but in 1833, all states had disestablished the Christian religion from state government of their own accord. And in the 1920s, 52 years later, the Supreme Court began interpreting the Establishment Clause as applicable to the state and local government with their interpretation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So Florida and others even have a version of the Establishment Clause in their state constitutions. We don't hear much about it because they're different around the country, but note that the same precise facts, or I should say the same precise arguments in law that we've made in court and others have made in court in the state of Florida and state and federal court are both the case in Florida law in the Constitution and in U.S. law in the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. So what exactly is a law, quote, respecting an establishment of religion? Oop, 1 second. I'm confusing myself here. Okay. Is it just some government proclamation that declares religion X as the acknowledged religion of that nation? And if you wanted to create a state religion, how would you do it? So what needs to be in place for your state religion to thrive or even maintain power that comes with such a designation? Is there a single person or committee in charge of the religion? How would you fund a state religion and provide access to the power needed to ensure your religion prospers above and beyond all the others? We've seen failures of this in Northern Europe and other parts of the world. And we've seen some success here in the United States, particularly in the last several years. But I mean, that's the whole point of having a state religion, right? To take advantage of a preferred status. So today, with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek, I'm going to talk to you about how you could establish a religion if you wanted to do so. And my hope is that I can help you dispense with the very tired argument that the Establishment Clause simply forbids the government from declaring a state religion. In fact, the Establishment Clause not only forbids a state religion, it also prohibits our government from favoring one religion over another and from preferring religion over non-religion, or non-religion over religion for that matter. So the hypothetical to be discussed for the sake of this argument is, if our government simply passed a law or amended the Constitution and declared that religion X was the official state religion, what would that actually accomplish? What difference would it make for them to only say that or write it down? Right? Think skeptically about that for a second. If it only was written down or said and no other factors changed, would it matter at all? So while it might make the next steps easier, it absolutely and exclusively, I argue, is those next steps that make the only difference that matters. Because if all your state religion had was a statement of support and no further action was taken to support it, you just have a piece of paper and nothing else. Another way to think of this is such a declaration would be an unfunded mandate. The funding in this case are the thousands of cuts that result in the death of our religious liberties and our secular government. And I posit that it is this establishment of religion that has been underway for more than 100 years now, not as a huge conspiracy, but each of the players doing their part to bring about the theocracy they believe would be better than the democracy that has served us so well. It's been confusing in the last few years that there's more than theocrats trying to take control, but that is in fact what we're seeing in the case of the religious right in much of Project 2025, combined with the rest of the power and money-hungry leadership and controllers of our government. But to establish a religion that has actual support from government, instead of just lip service, you need for it to have power to wield over other people and their ideologies, money to spend on serving your God and expanding your reach, and control over the lives of adherents and even outsiders. Access, in particular to children in the institutions where they dwell. Privilege for some meaning and second-class citizenship for others. An exclusion of others from all this based solely on their beliefs or practice. But let's start with power, because without power, you can't have any control. You give a religion power through special access to government officials. This could be found where government officials rely on religious leaders for political guidance, and the signs of this influence are not clear in the laws only, but in how they talk about the bills being proposed and considered. We've seen this over the years. Several years ago, the quiet part was not said out loud. The quiet part is being said out loud now. The boldness is apparent. Very often, our political leaders sound like religious leaders. And sometimes they are religious leaders. You give a state religion power when you allow or encourage religious leaders to electioneer, campaign, or politic on behalf of political candidates or elected officials seeking to hold onto their seats. The recent news you just heard read to you a moment ago is very concerning, and it'll take a little bit for the dust to settle on this, but I don't disagree with the remarks about it not necessarily applying to nonprofits. Keep in mind that non-houses of worship that are 501c3s declare where their funds come from, right? Houses of worship do not. So churches and other tax-exempt nonprofits can and should take a stance on issues and even ballot measures that align with their values, but should not be permitted to promote candidates or parties. As a matter of law, you might have a constitution that prohibits a religious test for public office, as ours does in Article 6. But if you wanted to establish a religion, you might be sure to give benefits to those candidates who openly profess alliance with the state religion. You might even make the political landscape friendlier for those people and the groups they support more than for their detractors. There are many organizations out there looking to make it easier for the, quote, right candidates to get elected. And this is just a few of those. A way you might do this is to conflate the values of all people with the values of the state religion. For instance, using the phrase America is a Christian nation, or calling shared secular human values Christian values. The more these phrases are repeated by political and religious leaders, the easier time the state religion has accessing even more power. You should be no stranger to, by now, Project 2025, so I'll only mention it in passing. The entirety of this is not all about establishing religion, but all of the civil rights and social justice issues of public policy that it addresses are strictly through the lens of Christian nationalism. Whether we see all or many of the changes this calls for in the next few years remains to be seen, but this is the playbook we need to be reading as we're on defense. You establish a religion by giving it money. If you don't give it any money, it is far less effective. To do this, you would allow and even encourage government agencies to use financial resources and government property to promote and practice that religion. You might encourage churches to meet in government spaces by offering them discounts or in-kind donation exchanges for rental fees. We see this often in Central Florida, and I'm sure that's a sign of it being elsewhere in the state, particularly in smaller rural places. So this is done in local schools whose facilities get upgrades or remodeling by local churches. Perhaps it's a win-win, but it is a relationship that's being established there, which I am very concerned with. And schools then discount the rental rates that the church has to pay because of that in-kind donation. You establish a state religion by directly or indirectly supporting that religion through special tax exemptions or direct aid that other religions do not receive. Direct aid would be things like grants to repair church buildings. This is not often done, but it is done in some of our less populated counties. They sneak through county and city commission meetings. Sometimes we hear about it and sometimes we don't. But indirect aid might be support for religious schools through vouchers and other funds, which no longer have to be covered by the church or the parents, freeing up resources that can now be used by the organization for the purpose of funding its religious objectives. So if you give an organization money, we've got some folks that aren't on mute. If you'd mute, that'd be great. We've got state funds, government funds going to secular parts of a religious organization so that they can use other funds to promote religious parts of a religious organization. More than 2,000 private schools get money from Florida government. And this has really changed in the last couple of years. Your tax money pays private schools to teach kids to the tune of about $4 billion a year now. As predicted, that number rose dramatically when Governor DeSantis signed a bill that allowed nearly every student in the state to be eligible for private school vouchers in the name of school choice, but that's not really where this is from. The overwhelming majority of these are religious schools, all of which are legally allowed to discriminate against LGBTQ, non-Christian, disabled, and any student for any reason, including poor performance. This is commonly done not just to cleanse the school of outside influence, but to increase average performance by removing students who underperform, something public schools cannot do. So when you're told that vouchers help private schools and private schools do a better job of teaching students, this is the BS that you need to remember is happening behind the scenes. Not always, but often. In 2020, more than 13,000 churches and religious nonprofits received loans of $150,000 or more, totaling nearly $10 billion as part of the Paycheck Protection Program, an important part of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Catholic Church alone received $1.4 billion. Now, I'm not proposing that we should not help churches in the same way we help other organizations, but of those those $10 billion, 100 organizations paid the loans back. Now, I haven't checked this data in the last several months, but the repaid loans were substantial, ranging from $150,000 to $4.3 million, but the total wasn't even 1% of the spend at last count. 66 million was repaid out of 10 billion. So to prop up your state religion, you have to give it money, lots and lots of money. You establish a state religion by giving it control over your lives, control over your cultural norms, control over your bodies and even your mind. Without any control, that has no ability to affect change in society. You give religion control when you allow it to restrict business days and hours of operations based on religious rules, such as the official Sabbath of the religion and the observance of holidays. Can you imagine, just for a second as an aside, if all of a sudden it was decided that the Sabbath is on Saturday and not Sunday? Because that's what God decided, or that's what the people that interpret God's wishes, like, it would go from being a perfectly good day and Sunday morning to go to a cafe because nobody else is there to it being the case on Saturday. I think it would throw our society into a disarray. But you give religion control so it can have the power to restrict the sale of those things which fall outside the moral guidelines of religion as well. I don't know how much you see this where you are, but we do have some restrictions in Central Florida and many voluntary restrictions from businesses doing this because Jesus, and Sunday. You give religion control when those sentenced for substance abuse offenses by the court are required to attend religious addiction treatment programs that promote the beliefs of the state religion. 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous are often run by Christian churches and are sourced on a Christian worldview. And attendance in these programs is often required by our courts with few secular options available. Now, some people secularize Christianity to make this work, and if it works, then great. But there is a lot of hyped up stats about how well this works, so be skeptical of that as well. Unfortunately, we are seeing more and more secular options. We've even got some on our website on a map that we keep, so you can find secular recovery options. You give religion control over your mind when you allow it to disguise itself as mental health care. It does this when religious parents and others prop up conversion therapy to change sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. You give religion control over your bodies when you're seeking reproductive health care in the form of abortion or birth control. And if you're admitted into a religious hospital and need or desire treatment that goes against the tenets of the religion in charge of the facility, you're out of luck. And at the end of your life, the established religion says whether you have the right to die with dignity and on your own terms. So to give the state religion its due, you have to be sure to relinquish a lot of control. You establish a religion by giving it access to your children and grandchildren. The reason the state religion needs this access, though, is so kids can be introduced and indoctrinated when they're young, but also while they're out of the home and in schools where religious instruction might be different or non-existent. To indoctrinate children, your state religion would do things like promote religious after-school programs for elementary school kids. You've probably heard of First Priority down in your area of Florida. We keep track of them to a certain extent from here, but they are heavily involved in hundreds of campuses. This is when churches and other religious institutions rent a classroom on campus, often on a Wednesday when students get out of school early. That way, parents who don't have an option for childcare are forced to keep them at school so that they get involved in religious aftercare programs. You establish a state religion and take advantage of public school kids when you have prayers during school board meetings or at graduation ceremonies, or even right on campus before school starts with teacher, staff, and religious leaders participating. We reported probably 8 counties this year for continuing to have prayer during their graduation ceremonies. Some of them will say, oh, well, that was just an utterance by a student, but others you can see very clearly were introduced for the purpose of giving a prayer. To give the state religion access to kids, you allow teachers, staff, and outsiders to promote and operate religious student organizations, which are required by law to be founded and led only by students. And if threats of hell don't work to convince kids, the sacrament of pizza usually does the trick of convincing kids to show up and get right with God. Or it at least increases your attendance so that you can tell your donors how many kids came to Jesus that year. To give the state religion access to kids, you pass laws allowing religious instruction on scripture to take place in public schools. Such a law exists in Florida and Oklahoma, is now putting a Bible in every public school classroom. You're hearing about the 10 Commandments. You're hearing about In God We Trust. That law recently changed in Florida. These things are happening. Religious establishment is underway. And you empower school officials, employees, or coaches to participate in religious worship with kids. This is Coach Kennedy, the one holding up the helmet there. It's hard to see because he's wearing black, but he's from Bremerton, Washington. Actually, I think he's from Florida now. But his attorneys convinced a majority of Supreme Court justices that what's photographed here actually never happened. Now, I'm not sure I can say that with a straight face because I don't think that Supreme Court justices are fooled by this. Fortunately, that case that came down a couple of years ago, it did nothing to change the state of the law. But it did embolden and misinform people who now assume they have new privileges that they indeed do not have. So in this case, the narrowness of a decision helped us. And no conversation about access to kids would be complete without talking about school chaplains. This bill was signed into law at a high school in Osceola County last spring. So far, only Dixie County has initiated a policy. Thank God. If you want your state religion to be successful over the long term, you will need access to kids. Fortunately, I don't think we can take all the credit for this in our organization, but we went to Marion County every time it was discussed. 0 people came out in support of it in what I think is one of the most religious, overtly religious counties, Marion County. No one spoke in favor of it. It failed. And in Osceola County, where the governor went and signed this, it failed. So our advocacy and yours can work. You establish a religion by giving that religion and its followers privilege that others don't have, like promoting a national day of prayer or having prayer breakfasts strictly in the tradition of the state religion. I'm still waiting for the Muslim prayer breakfasts. I don't see them happening anywhere. JFK is speaking here in 1961 at the National Prayer Breakfast. When our top elected officials do this, it gives permission to all those in authority to do so. Now, many of you may know that JFK was probably defending himself from the Protestants as a Catholic by attending this event. Like having prayers in the tradition of that specific religion at government events as well. To do this, either the elected officials pray themselves or they invite people that agree with the state religion to pray the way the state religion would prefer. In this way, you incentivize support so you can grow the state religion, whether through increasing the numbers of believers or simply normalizing participation in the state religion. The image on the left, by the way, is a prayer vigil in Ocala, which was in the courts for more than 10 years and just recently decided in favor of the plaintiffs against allowing such events. So that was a long, hard fight that started with the American Humanist Association and finished without them. They've lost their legal center, but they're working to get it back. But that is a victory. It was a long, hard victory, but that was a victory. You establish a state religion by allowing or encouraging participation in organizations to distribute the scripture of the state religion on government property or in public schools, like this event at Wekiva High School, where no adults are supposed to be there and the tables aren't supposed to be staffed. And you can see very clearly that both of those things are happening. So this is 2013 in Orange County. We sued and stopped it, but we know it's happening in other places where we haven't heard about it. You give religious privilege to adherents when judges rule in child custody cases to penalize those not professing allegiance to the state religion by awarding child custody to the other parent, the one that claims to be a follower of the state religion. You're hearing the word state religion a lot here, and that's on purpose, because Christianity is our state religion when Christian nationalists get the opportunity to make it so. You give religious privilege to the state religion when you have civil marriage ceremonies that include religious language from the state religion, even when those take place at the courthouse. For those of you familiar with Florida law, ordained ministers of the gospel is literally what it reads about who is allowed to perform these ceremonies. So atheists, Jews, Unitarian Universalists, and everyone else is, quote unquote, according to the Florida law, an ordained minister of the gospel. You give privileges to the state religion when you allow or promote the display of religious monuments on public property to the exclusion of all others. We have several Ten Commandments monuments at small counties in Florida right there at the courthouse lawn. Not everywhere, and sometimes it's accompanied by other monuments, but this is another example, the Bladensburg Cross in the DC area, just outside of DC in Maryland. You give privilege to a state religion when you provide opportunity only for those chosen religious leaders to lead prayers at government meetings and exclude others. In 2015, we sued Brevard County for excluding us from their prayer practice. In 2020, we won at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and have begun offering invocations there. And you can't have religion without having outsiders. So you'll have to exclude some people from the privilege. Otherwise, what's the point of having your own religion be the religion of the state? This is how you squelch dissent and build support through fear of reprisal for detractors. Understandably, people don't speak out if they are in the minority or led to believe their opinions aren't popular. So you establish a state religion by allowing companies to hire and fire people based on the religious tenets and values of the state religion, regardless of the religious tenets and values of everyone else. At the same time, you allow businesses to refuse to serve those who do not conform to the state religion's brand of morality. And you certainly have to allow social services that are provided by religious organizations to discriminate against some of their clients because of religious beliefs and non-conforming practices. The juxtaposition of people complaining about Sharia law who simply don't understand how that interacts with contracts and people and the government. Those same folks are likely the ones complaining about not being able to discriminate based on their own version of Sharia law. You establish a state religion by having a practice of swearing an oath of office, as well as oaths in courts of law on the holy book of the state religion. I think this is less common in more urban or further developed larger counties and cities, but it does still happen. But those who don't agree to swear on a Bible would be considered outsiders. Imagine if you were going to testify on behalf of your family member or friend, and you were asked to swear to God, presuming you don't believe in God. That would be hard to do and admit to the court that you're not like everyone else. But the goal is not advocacy and activism in that moment. The goal is getting your friend out of trouble because they didn't do something. That's a hard place to be. And any good lawyer would tell you to pretend to believe in God to get through the process. Of course, discrimination by government agencies and the religious nonprofits who rely on government funding would be permitted. We see this today in excluding the LGBT community and especially trans people from full equality. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, you establish a state religion by conflating national pride and religious morality. It seems to me that we might already have an establishment of religion in the United States, and we just don't realize it. There is so much more to establishing a religion than simply making a religious declaration. I hope you recognize some, if not all, of these examples, because none of these are hypothetical. I gave you clear examples of where these are happening. I didn't say this might be the case. There are a few that I didn't go into the details on for the sake of time, but every single one of these are in our files at our local organization who have been working for 13 years to keep religion and government separate. These are recurring violations of the Establishment Clause that humanists, Unitarian Universalists, pagans, Wiccans, atheists, Jews, Christians, and many minority traditions fight against all the time. And all those benefits to the state religion, of all those advantages that the majority religion sees in society today, keep in mind, no proclamation was ever needed to establish a state religion. It simply has these advantages because of its majority status. This is the problem of religious privilege. So how do you make the argument that religious privilege offered by the state is the same as making a law respecting an establishment of religion? As I said before, and I'll put it this way, if a religion can have all the benefits that Christianity has today without being the official religion of the United States, how much difference would an official declaration make? You see, the people that make the point that the Establishment Clause is only about naming an official religion are the very people who are trying to fight to maintain their religious privilege. They are the ones saying that they should have all those benefits I discussed, but that they don't need an official declaration because that's a bridge too far. We can't do that. That would be an establishment. And they surely don't need any official declaration to know that their reign over the United States is ordained by their God. You can bet, though, they'd probably be in favor of secularism if they were in the religious minority and were subject to the will of a religion to which they objected. So I suggest to you that it is impossible for a state religion to have any impact on society by just being declared so. You have to have the money, the power, the control, the access, the privilege. Without that, all you have is a piece of paper on the wall saying something happened in the past. The founders knew that, and that's why our courts have, at least until recently, understood that to be the case. It is not the act of declaring a national or state religion alone that matters. It is the effect of all the violations we're seeing every day that makes the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
You
Wow.
bet.
Wow, jam-packed with information, and thank you so much. Drew, we're going to have to share the Q&A, and you and Tony can cover the room, and I'll cover the people on the Zoom.